About leading edge technology. I'm VP of Engagement Jon Collins, and this week we're going to try and cut through the jargon and give you what you need to make sense of everything to do with security, risk, the bigger picture of probability times impact. And I'm here to welcome Marshall Heilman to talk about all of that. So let's do it. Marshall, over to you.
Well, John, thanks for having me. So I'm Marshall Heilman. I'm the new CEO of DTEX Systems, and an insider risk management company. And I'm obviously excited to talk to you here today about my previous life, if you will, all about cybersecurity, and I'll let you ask some questions there, as well as my new life here in the insider risk management space, which I find absolutely fascinating.
Thank you. Yeah, and so we always fluff the intro, by the way. We have never once done a decent intro, apart from once, and then we fluffed the fact that we've done a decent intro. So that's pretty normal to us. And I think what we wanted to get to very quickly, because we talked about this in the green room, was the fact that this wasn't your background, the insider risk management side of things. You've come from a cybersecurity background, so why don't you just tell us a bit about your what are the pillars of your background, if you like, and how that fits, and then we'll get on to the insider risk stuff.
Sure. So I'll try and be succinct about it. But my original background was in the United States Marine Corps, where I was you can say a bit of a non-standard Marine, because I was focused on help desk tech work, if you will, networking, and then ultimately cybersecurity. And cybersecurity is where I got my in the Marine Corps, I got my start in cybersecurity doing offensive work. So what we now call red teaming operations, purple team operations, things like that. That led me to join Mandiant back in 2006, when Mandiant was a very small company. And as I jokingly like to say, when you join an incident response company as a red teamer, you very quickly realize you're a second-class citizen, at least back then. And so I made the jump almost immediately into doing incident response, which I absolutely fell in love with. So my original background is in red teaming. I then switched into doing incident response. I did that for about 10 years, worked my way up in the consulting organization. During that 10-year period, I also relaunched the red team within Mandiant. And then I moved into a more of a research role where I was running a team called Advanced Practices, where we built some systems to help with the intelligence work. We did malware analysis and reverse engineering, some system engineering, just some more interesting specialized work that a company like Mandiant could really leverage. From there, I also got asked to take on responsibility as a general manager for Mandiant's managed detection and response organization. So I got to see what it was like to run a structured business that needed to be repeatable, where every customer couldn't be or you couldn't customize the work that you're doing for every customer the way you could when you were a consultant. From there, I stepped into the global CTO role for the last couple of years. I was at Mandiant, both as Mandiant as a standalone organization or standalone public company, and then for the last year when Mandiant had been acquired by Google. So I got to see, not just be the CTO for Mandiant, but also see how Google went about building products and developing products and engineering products. Just how an organization like that's known for doing product management engineering, how they operated as well. And then I got the opportunity to join DTEX as the CEO. And that excited me because I had all these other roles in my career where I got to be very technical. I got to lead teams. I got to be non-technical. I got to be a general manager. Right? I got like that, full range of experience. But I'd never actually, gotten the chance to be the one who made all the decisions, was responsible for all the decisions. And so when this role came up, it excited me personally from a career perspective. And I'll talk a little bit more about why the insider risk space in a minute. But for now, I just want to say, from a career standpoint, it was something that was very interesting to me, and I jumped at the chance.
Sure. I mean, I want to jump right way back. So you were in the Marines, and then you went on to my favorite kind of person in incident response are people that have actually worked on the front lines, if you like, or in the field, literally. And that because we use all these analogies to frontline and so on and so forth, but generally they're the calmest people, because nothing that an IT system is ever going to throw at you is the same as what you could have thrown at you when you're there in a live situation. And so crisis, there's a lot of little crisis management consultancies or whatever, ex-military people, they're like, yeah, you call it a crisis, but no one's going to die here. It's so the level of calm that just comes across is always a wonder to behold. And it's fascinating also to link back to, as I mentioned again earlier, that last week we did the whole incident response thing about how fascinating that whole area is, particularly when you get on top of why things went wrong.
Mhm.
And so you're getting that whole gamut of having worked with things going wrong, but then the why things go wrong, and then you're moving up into companies and presumably applying some of those hard-earned skills to business, which is not everyone gets that opportunity to kind of transition from the kind of constant problem solving into a business role, which actually is constant problem solving. Am I right?
Yeah, you are. Like when I look at my time in the Marine Corps, the two things I think that I took out of it the most and applied into, into the business world, if you will. The first was the concept of leadership. In the military, you learn to lead a certain way, right? As a leader, you have to be willing to do as much or more than you ask your teams to do. You have to understand what it means to build a cohesive unit, right? To build that mission focus, to build that culture. Your team, you have to get your teams to respect you because you're going to ask them to do things that in some cases they don't want to do, right? You're going to try and push them to the limits of what they're able to do so you get the most out of your team. And that's hard to do if the team doesn't respect you. So like there's a certain leadership style that I think the military breeds that I personally love. I subscribe to, and that's what I try to bring to the business world with me. The other aspect of it is accountability. There, it's hard to be held accountable in the same way as you get held accountable when you're in the military, when you're in those type of situations. And so in the business world, if you ask someone to do something, you need to follow up and make sure it gets done, right? You need to hold that person accountable. That's how stuff actually gets done. That's how you're executing on your strategic plans and so forth. But it all stems from great leadership and accountability.
Hmm.
In my experience, anyways.
And how do you? I think I want to get into the kind of segue from security to risk to insider risk, if you like. But from a security standpoint, when you've lived and breathed it, a lot of security people, I think this is still true, feel that business doesn't really get what security is about because yeah, you speak to security people, they're constantly going, "Oh God, there's things going wrong. You've no idea. The world is falling down." And it, from a business person standpoint, it's like, "Oh, there goes the security people again, chicken licking kind of thing." How did you find that as you transitioned into the business role? Kind of um, again with the calm that comes from the military
Mhm.
to then recognizing that risk is wrapped up in everything that you do, but you don't need to kind of get overexcited about it, but you do need to deal with it.
Right. I'd, I would answer this two different ways. First, I think there's a two-way street. I think you get some of what's called them security purists, and this was absolutely me for a long time in my career, which I'll talk about in a minute. And those are people who think that you have to close out every single risk or every vulnerability you find you have to deal with, right? Because it's a security problem. They can't be allowed to happen,
Mm,
right? And that's where you get these, security purists that care more about the securing the company that they love and care so much about, right? That's why they have a job in the first place. And they put the business aspect of the company second to security. Then you get the business leaders. They're there to run their business. They're there to generate profits in most cases, right? To build a product. Security is just one aspect of what they have to deal with. And so, and when you start understanding that security purists look at it one way, business leaders look at it another way, neither one is entirely right or entirely wrong. You have to find that, nice meat in the middle. And so when business leaders understand that security is something that helps protect their business so that they can go and generate profits for their shareholders, and the security personnel understand that they are there as a business enabler, but they are not the entirety of the business, right? When you get that level of understanding, then the two sides start to work well together, and you get, I'd argue, a fairly well run company. And I
mhm,
think over the last 10 years, we've seen that dynamic change. I think many more organizations now understand security's place in the world, if you will, as being part of risk, but not all of it. And I think more and more security professionals are understanding that they're there to help a business run, but they're there to help the business. They're not there just to do the job they love so much and protect the company they love so much. It's a little bit of both. And so I
mhm,
think we're seeing a lot of organizations, kind of move past that old school narrative into understanding what risk looks like. And if you look at just the type of CISOs and the where they report and how much access they have to the senior executives and the board nowadays, I think you can absolutely see that narrative and that dynamic change to where security is becoming more important than it ever was in the past. But senior level security personnel have to understand that they're there to support the business and to enable the business, right?
mhm.
Not to be the team that says no to everything because it introduces a little bit of risk to the organization.
Okay, you said you'd mention you'd come back to your role as a security person, and I'm also interested to know. I mean, did you have an epiphany? Did you wake up one day going, "Oh my God, it's all about risk," or did you was it a kind of gradual thing? Um,
It's a gradual thing. I think for a lot of people, it depends on where they're at in their stage of their career. When I was younger and I was doing the technical work, for me, it was all about the work, right? The business, of course, I worked at a company. Of course, there was a business around me, but I loved the work that I was doing, and that's what I cared about. So I was absolutely on the far end of you have to protect everything, you must secure everything. Or if you're doing an investigation, of course, you want to know every single little thing that happened in the investigation because why wouldn't you? I
mhm.
didn't always take into account the fact that, well, there's a real cost because the company is paying you to do some work, right? Maybe they don't necessarily need to have that particular answer, even though it's interesting to me. And so I think when I was younger and deep in the technical details, I didn't care so much about the business. I cared more about the work because I loved it. Then, as I gradually grew up in my career and held management and leadership and ultimate executive positions, that's when you start to recognize that, well, it's not always about answering every single question or patching every vulnerability. It's about looking at it from a risk perspective so you can run your business. Because now all of a sudden you have the business side pulling at you saying, these are your priorities. And you have the security side pulling at you saying, these are your priorities. And you have to find a way to marry the two or merge the two. Because if you have everything as a priority, then nothing is, right? So you have to figure out where do you really focus your time and attention so you have good enough security such that you are enabling your company to be in a risk profile that it's comfortable with.
And that's, I mean, I was thinking of an expression in the middle of what you were saying, which was kind of the security-free bar, only it's not. So you're constantly going, well, I need to spend time on this, more time, because that. But then you go, hang on, the amount of time I've spent on this, that's actually accumulated X cost to the company that was probably in excess of what the problem was. Back to the the cost of security breaches or whatever. So I've solved for something very small. Or the other thing you can do is what I did once, which is to actually create business risks, thinking I was solving security problems, like auto logout on Sun workstations, for example.
Hmm.
I thought I was solving people leaving workstations logged in, and actually they were losing work.
Hmm.
So it made no sense whatsoever from a business standpoint. When you're getting so paint me a picture, if possible, of the bigger picture of risk, because sure we've got the cyber stuff, etc. And this is a little bit of a segue as well. I'll show my working because I want to see where insider risk fits in with the whole kind of. So there's businesses make risk-based decisions. I was thinking it's a bit like catching a baseball. We're very good at maths even though we don't know it, and that kind of sudden decision to, hey, let's buy that company. There's a massive mathematics going on in that that sometimes just happens with the stomach. So there's all those business risk type things. Then there's the operational and the organizational factors, and then there's all the technical stuff and the threat surface and so on. What does the map look like to you?
Yeah, it's a bit of an open-ended question, right? I mean, like there have been entire books written on the subject, and it depends on how granular you want to get or how large you want to get with risk. So let's
Hmm.
focus just on risk that let's say the traditional CISO would be involved in, right? So you've
Hmm.
got in a lot of cases you've got your physical risk, you've got your cyber risk, you've got your risk from your insiders, you've got your risk from your supply chain, your suppliers, right? You got risk from your contractors. So, a lot of these the larger and more mature organizations, and I'm gonna generically say the CISO. I know, for some organizations it's a different function, different person. But let's just say it's the CISO has responsibilities for these various areas. They have to figure out how much budget do they want to allocate to each one of those areas. And I do think that that will depend on the point in time that the company is in, the risks that they perceive to their business and so forth. Like one of the things that I think Mandy and other similar companies have done really well is taking an intelligence-based approach to risk. So they talk about trying to understand the type of attackers that would be going after your business or your assets, right? When you understand that, you can better deploy your resources to protect against those particular attackers, right? And secure those resources. Now, that's not the entirety of your risk profile. That's one piece of it. At the same time, you have to look at physical security. How well protected are your buildings and your locations? We got hired for a job once a while ago to try and break into a substation at a train to see if we could issue commands to that particular train, right? Obviously, physical security played a part in that. There wasn't just a technical aspect of can you actually do this work, but can you even get access to the substation in the first place and then have that second order of magnitude work done, right? So that's where you have to look at the risk holistically. What I think is getting especially hard today, cybersecurity risk, I think, has now become pretty well understood. It's something we've been working on for almost 30 years now. There's been a lot of literature written on the topic. Like organizations are starting to really understand how to quantify risk to their business from a cybersecurity perspective. When you
Hmm.
start talking about insider risk, this is where it gets to me more really interesting and more difficult. Because insiders, you have your malicious insider, right? So obviously someone who wants to do harm to the organization for whatever the reason may be. But you also have your careless or your negligent insiders, right? People who do things that they shouldn't do because they don't care about the policy. They're not thinking it through. They simply made a mistake, right? So you have all the risk around these unwitting users that do something unintentionally. You have the users that have been compromised. Now, all of a sudden, their accounts are being used to do bad things by a foreign adversary, which is not necessarily the user himself, but maybe he did something silly to allow himself to have been compromised, right? That's
Hmm.
always the a possibility. And then you have all the risks around what we call predictive analytics, trying to understand, is someone going to become a risk? For example, I'm Marshall Heilman. If I start logging into work every day an hour later than normal, and I'm sending 20% less emails, am I quiet quitting? Am I one of those people who've gone out and gotten a second job or a third job, right? Do I just not care about the company or the work? Am I getting ready to quit? Did I have a bad performance review, and what I really need is someone to sit down and talk to me about my behavior and get me back on track? And so it becomes, the system now has to worry about all those different factors, and then how does he handle the risk accordingly to all those? Is an insider more risky than a nation state adversary? Well, to me, that depends on the company. I'm going to give you a brief example from my
Hmm.
cybersecurity days. I think really helps illustrate this point. I worked with a company a number of years ago who had experienced a breach, and they decided that they never wanted to experience that level of a breach again. And so they went and they dedicated a tremendous amount of money to improving their security program, a tremendous amount of money, people, and time. And what they built was a security posture that was quite honestly awesome, right? They basically achieved their goal. We were able to prove that the way that they had been penetrated beforehand couldn't happen again, right? Or at least not with the information available to us at that time. So at that point in time, they were very secure given the guidelines and parameters they had put in place. And over the years, what happened was that organization didn't get hacked again, but they looked at their spend and they said, okay, relative to our industry, we are spending up here. Everyone else is spending down here, more modestly. Maybe we should be somewhere in the middle. Maybe we don't have
Hmm.
to have defense contractor like security at this particular organization. And so they started to reduce their spend to bring it down to something that's more normal for their industry and the type of company that they're in. And I think it's something businesses have to keep in mind is you can definitely overspend on security. In some cases, it's worth it, but not in all cases. You want to spend the right amount for the risk posture that you believe you have. And that comes down to the CISO working with the executive team and the board to understand, what should my risk posture look like? What risk are we willing to accept? And then if and when there is an incident, you have to accept the fact that, well, that's part of the risk-based calculation that you made is you expected to have an incident, you expect to handle it in a certain way, it would cost a certain amount of money. And that's at the end of the day acceptable. It's part of doing business nowadays.
I mean, I think if Howard was on, our CTO, who was a CISO, he would say 10% of your annual turnover, or some figure like that, should be spent on security
Mhm.
as a kind of blanket, and he would also make the point that most companies underspend. So
Mhm.
I don't know if you have a kind of finger in the air or rule of thumb, or whatever you want to do with your appendages, um, view on how to make that, how to set that figure, or how to start that calculation.
Again, I think that's very industry specific because there are certain, companies that are, let's say grocery stores, for example, are probably going to spend less money as a percentage of their overall revenue than a bank would, right? So I think it really depends on, the assets you have to secure, again, the risk profile you have, who you're protecting against, in the industry vertical you're in. So that's why I don't think it's fair to say, well, it should be 10%, it should be 20%. And I've seen a lot of numbers around like what the optimal spend should be. But I really
Mhm.
think that, that's maybe the optimal spend with a wide range of deviation because it really depends on so many other factors. In terms of companies spending less than they probably should on security, from a security point of view, I mean, we're always going to say that because, of course, I want to see companies spend more and more on security. I don't like reading about breaches in the news. I don't like reading about insiders having stolen data and giving it to WikiLeaks. Like, I don't want to see those things happen. And usually, not always, but usually more security spending equates to preventing more of those type of attacks, right? And preventing more of those type of data loss. So it seems like it goes hand in hand, but I'm also not the one in those companies' shoes saying, okay, well, if I allocate 10% more budget to security, I'm going to allocate 10% less budget to something over here that then causes us to make less money, reduces our stock price and so forth. So I think they're tough business decisions that we in security, are not always part of.
Thinking about the insider threat, I can remember, it's a term that comes in and out of popularity, because and let me get one thing out of the way. It's the old expression. I think a chef came up with this. It's never ascribe to malice what can be put down to stupidity.
Mhm.
is so we've got this idea that the employees are bad or whatever, and actually it's more likely, just like me, we're going to be dumb. We're going to leave passwords around. We're going to say stuff we shouldn't do. We're going to click on a link that we shouldn't have clicked on. We're going to whatever, leave files unencrypted, or send something home via our personal email that we shouldn't have done, in order to, because that was what seemed to be the easiest. So we're going to do dumb stuff. But I think with the term, how do we strike a balance ultimately between employees being people being our best asset? However, they do need a bit of hand holding around certain aspects of risk management and security and so on. And then at the other end of the scale, treating everybody as as a bad actor, and kind of locking everything down, and setting draconian policies. Is there a Goldilocks place in the middle? How do you find that?
Yeah, I mean, it's a difficult place to find. That's why I think we have buzzwords like zero trust nowadays, where companies are trying to explore the concept of, trust no one at any aspect throughout your environment. But I would say I look at insiders a little bit different. Yes, you can say that insiders, or humans, if you will, are the weakest link in security, and that's a true statement. But they're also your first line of defense. We spend a lot of time talking about what goes wrong when something happens. We don't necessarily talk about all the times that user does prevent something from happening, or by following good security policies and procedures. They do things they're supposed to. They've unknowingly prevented something from happening, right? Or they report phishing emails, or all things that users are supposed to do, and they are doing. So that's why from an insider risk perspective, this is one of DTEX's core differentiators. We try and look at the context or the behavior behind the activity, because two sets of activity, one context is very different from the other. User takes some data, zips it up, and sends it to Dropbox. One. User two takes some data, zips it up, sends it to Dropbox. Okay, that's the exact same activity. But in this particular example, user A was, let's say, compromised by a nation state, and that was a nation state actor that actually did that activity on behalf of the user. User B was simply trying to do his job, didn't realize that the Excel spreadsheets he put in that zip file contained sensitive information, and uploaded to Dropbox. Against policy, not a smart thing to do, but very different from the first user who was compromised. And you want to treat the way that you react to those situations very differently.
Mm-hmm.
Right. And so, like, when we think about insider risk, we look at, you've got your intentionally, your malicious user. So they're intentionally bad to a company. You've got your negligent users. These are the ones who do something either because they're careless, or they don't care, or they just simply made a mistake. You've got your users that are compromised, right? By a foreign adversary. And so the context behind why they took a certain activity, from my perspective, really matters. And that's where the behavioral science comes in. It's understanding the context behind why someone would do a thing, but it's also
Mm-hmm.
starting to understand the why of your employees at your company. Did a particular employee get a bad annual review or quarterly review? That might change his behavior, right, or affect what he's doing. Is he going through a hard time at home? And trying to understand, the behavior of this individual outside of just he took this action or that action.
Well, that's a different Goldilocks, isn't it? The balance between being intrusive, because some of that's personal and private, and all that kind of thing. So, same question almost. How do you strike a balance between needing to know every factor, or and I guess, are there kind of is it possible to look at someone's behaviors online, and kind of assess lackadaisical from it, that they're just becoming a bit more casual in what they're doing, or a bit more complacent or something? What's the best approach there?
Yeah, so I mean, there's a lot of data and research going on right now around how much should you be involved in your employees' lives outside of work versus inside of work. And I was talking with a government organization recently. They're walking me through some of the studies that they've done to prove that trying to understand someone's behavior on social media is not actually a good indicator of how much of an insider risk they're going to be. It's looking at their behavior within work, right? And there's lots of different ways you can look at that. Tells you more about their behavior and whether they are a risk individual or not than what they're doing necessarily outside of work. Now, I'm sure this is the type of study needs to be updated probably every year, every couple of years, as the socioeconomic climate that we live in changes and people's ideals and values change. But for right now, that seems to be what the data suggests. So when it comes to employee privacy, there's a difference between monitoring and surveillance. Surveillance is bad. You don't want to do that. That's looking at what employees are doing, let's say all day, every day, et cetera. And we absolutely don't want to go down that route. All right. At DTEX, again, one of our differentiators is we value employee privacy. We put employee privacy first. So we do the concept of monitoring, and we have a patent on a pseudo anonymization algorithm that we leverage, so we can take employee data, we basically anonymize that data, or encrypt it, if you will, And so when a cybersecurity team is looking at a particular individual risky user, they don't see Marshall Heilman. They see user A, B, C, D. Let's say. And what happens is we all have inherent biases. And so another thing we're protecting against outside of just the data and what an employee is doing is, an inherent bias. Do I not like this individual because of a protected category or some other reason, right? So by abstracting away the names, you have no idea what department the individual is in. You don't know who the person is. You don't know anything about them. What you see is that this particular user has a risk score that is considered unacceptable by the company. Here's the parameters on why the risk score is unacceptable. Now, if this is an individual the company decides they want to go investigate, you can go and talk to your HR team or your legal team or whoever it is that has the authority to do an investigation on an insider. You can go get that authority, unlock the data, and then you learn, oh, hey, this user is Marshall Heilman. Now let's go investigate this particular user. So we basically try and obfuscate away the data that we're collecting, so you don't know what it is Marshall's actually doing. You only see that a particular user happens to be doing risky behavior. Here's the context behind that, so you know what that risky behavior was, and then you can go unlock the data, say, okay, it's Marshall Heilman. Now let's go do an investigation. So we do try and balance. Like I said, we don't want to do surveillance. We just want to do monitoring where appropriate. And by pseudo anonymizing the data and the user themselves, we try and get rid of inherent bias so that you're really only looking at risk.
So this isn't CCTV in the restrooms kind of
Correct.
level of.
Correct.
I really like that difference between monitoring and surveillance. I think that's hugely important, and I'm wondering as well whether there's an element of kind of just asking people, "Are you sad?" And there's overlaps with employee experience tooling or just personal reviews and making sure that you're having them. And maybe the problem isn't it. If all 6 people in a team of 6 are starting to have problems, maybe the problem's the person running the team, not the people, et cetera. So,
Mhm.
I mean, do you find, uh, what do you find ultimately if one pillar is the kind of ability to get a better view on behaviors and so on, what are the other pillars? Is it about kind of, because I'm assuming no software package or whatever, it's the standard thing, it's always people, process, technology. So what do you need from a people standpoint? What do you need from a process standpoint in order to feel comfortable that insider risk is being mitigated or minimized, without breaking, without doing the monitoring surveillance thing, and keeping people on board and having a happy workforce and all that.
Yeah.
What's the
So I
package
mean,
look like?
yeah, I mean, honestly, there's a lot that goes into it. From the people perspective, generally companies that take care of the people have happier employees. And just as a quick side note, I was looking at some proposed research that what a government organization is considering doing to try and understand what behaviors they can show will actually reduce the risk of someone becoming an insider. So rather than just looking for risk or indicators that say this particular user is more risky, looking for things that say this person's actually less risky because they're doing these things. So it's a way to say happier employees, more content employees, less risky. Right. So I think that's one aspect of it. Having people that are trained in insider risk is also extremely important. If you look at the cybersecurity space, we have people that are trained in all the different aspects of cybersecurity. When it comes to insider risk management, in some cases, it's someone's second or third job, right? Or it's a person who thought that'd be interesting. It's not always, except for some of the larger organizations, people that have been trained and have years of experience in understanding people and how people behave, and in insider risk, if you will. So it's really having the right people and the right team in place. It's understanding the people that you need to talk to, because in a lot of companies, doing something about an insider is cybersecurity, it is HR, and it is legal, right? Because you have to have those 3 aspects have to weigh in before you can take any kind of an action against that particular
Mhm,
user. So people perspective, again, it's having the right people, it's making sure you're taking care of your people, and make sure you understand who to talk to. From a processes perspective, it's hard to identify that someone's doing something wrong if there's not a clear policy on what's right and what's wrong. And so when we work with organizations, we try and we work with them to understand what's an acceptable level of risk versus not. Why you have different categories of people within the company, so let's talk about the risk to each one of those categories. For example, an engineer is gonna, an engineer getting access to source code, not risky behavior, right? Let's say Marshall Heilman in finance getting access to source code, that's probably risky behavior, right? Because
mhm,
that probably shouldn't happen, but maybe in some organizations that's allowed. So it's trying to understand those things. So companies have to really have good policies and procedures in place around what they should be doing, what they shouldn't be doing, and how you deal with an insider. For example, if you catch an obviously malicious insider, you can prove they're malicious. Do you fire them? Do you prosecute them? Do you turn them over to someone? Like, what do you do with that particular employee? And the time to
mhm,
figure that out is not the time you caught them doing something malicious. And yeah, the last aspect here is technology, because in our hyper interconnected world, there's simply, there's too many systems, too many signals, too much data for a human to go through and really understand what people are doing. So you have to have good technology in place that's going to look across the spectrum of all the information you have and make those determinations of this particular user is more risky, this particular user seems to be compromised, this particular user just sent data out of your environment. What do you want to do about it? And if you want to block that activity, again, you also need technology to say, hey, this risky user tried to send some data out, but because he was at a certain risk level, we blocked it. And here's an alert. Now you can go do something about it.
And it is, I'm hearing a feedback loop. So you put in everything in place in order to get that feedback loop, so that when you've got the information, you've actually got the ability to do something with it. So the manager is trained up to know how to deal with the consequences of getting that information, for example.
Absolutely.
Cool. I mean, we're kind of shifting up on time. I mean, this has been super fascinating. Thank you. I'm wondering if we can leave people with kind of I don't know which way it would be, like kind of the where to start, or because everyone's starting in the middle on insider risk. We're already in this situation. I know that my top tip for anyone would be uh, a little bit of training goes a long way as well. And so security awareness training, just kind of turning the dumb into a bit less dumb. But I don't know what would be your piece of pithy advice that you would leave people with.
Yeah, I would say the first thing that an organization really needs to do is decide whether this is a problem or a risk for them that they want to go and do something about. Because if they don't assign budget for it or they don't make it someone's primary job, they're not going to have a good handle on their insider risk, right? It just can become something that people do. I saw a quote recently from Jeff Bezos that said, "If you want something to fail, make it their part-time job," right? And I'd argue in the insider space that it could not be more true. An organization has to commit to trying to manage this risk if they want to truly manage it. If not, and they want to spend their money somewhere else, great. That's what they've decided to do. That's an acceptable risk to them. But so I think it's a company deciding that they want to manage this risk, and they commit to it. Would be the first thing to do. Every company has to start somewhere.
Right. That fantastic. Thank you so much, Marshall, for joining us. And thank you, audience out there, for listening. And this has been The Good, the Bad, and the Techy, as we say, the GigArm's podcast on leading edge technology, this time insider risk, security, cybersecurity. If you want to know more, you can find us on all the usual streaming services. Please do subscribe, gigarm.com/podcast. And we'll see you next time. Thank you again, Marshall.
Thanks, John.